It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Breaking news tonight. Sky News understands that the Ministry of Defence has been hacked by China. We'll have the latest live from the MOD. Also ahead, renewed tension in Gaza as Israel approves military action in Rafah, despite Hamas accepting a ceasefire proposal. John Swinney becomes leader of the SNP unopposed and is expected to be sworn in as Scotland's First Minister later this week. A little girl crushed to death on a migrant boat last month is laid to rest in France. Gun salutes mark 1 year since the coronation of King Charles. Plus, celebrations in Suffolk. Ipswich Town party after securing their place in top-flight football. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. We start with breaking news tonight, and Sky News understands that the Chinese state has hacked the Ministry of Defence. MPs are going to be told tomorrow of a massive data breach involving the MOD, targeting service personnel. And our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, joins me now live from the Ministry of Defence with more on this story. Sam.
That's right. Sky News has revealed that the Ministry of Defence has been the target of a massive data breach by the Chinese state. We understand that officials in the MOD building behind me have been scrambling all weekend after discovering just a few days ago that the payroll systems for existing service personnel, armed forces personnel, and some veterans was hacked. Hacked, we understand, by the Chinese state, although tomorrow, when Grant Shapps stands up and tells MPs details of what went on, he will not name China, but we understand that China is the identity of who they think is behind it. Now, that payroll system was operated by a contractor. I understand that preliminary investigations suggest that no actual data has been taken, but we'll have to wait and see. I also understand that that payroll system wasn't actually part of the MOD's main computer system, but nevertheless, I think there's an understanding in the building behind me that the idea that the Chinese were infiltrating, trying to infiltrate that system that has the identities and the bank account details of some of our most cherished personnel, some of the most cherished public officials that there are, will cause controversy and will up pressure on Number 10 to look again at the relationship between the UK and China. It was just a couple of months ago that the Deputy Prime Minister was revealing that China had been behind a breach of the Electoral Commission's data. That's the watchdog that looks after all of our voting data, and that China had been targeting specific MPs, China skeptic MPs, if you will, for more information. Now the news that armed services personnel have been targeted by the Chinese, I think, will be a cause of great concern. Tomorrow, Grant Shapps will lay out more details. Also tomorrow, I think there'll be an enormous effort underway to reassure service personnel. They'll be told that even though the system's been shut down, they'll still be paid this month and that they've got the situation under control. But my goodness, I think tonight, a big problem, big further problem, a big further boulder in Britain's relationship with China. Pressure is building to work out not only what went wrong, whether any data was lost, but also whether tougher action should be taken against the Chinese state.
Sam, for the moment, thank you. There's renewed tension in Gaza tonight after Israel approved a military operation in the city of Rafah, with Israeli forces striking targets in the area. The move came hours after Hamas announced it had accepted an Egyptian-Qatari ceasefire proposal. Israel says the proposal is far from meeting its demands, but it will send negotiators to continue talks. Our international correspondent John Sparks reports.
It was a piece of news that came quite unexpectedly. Word about a ceasefire that had apparently been agreed. It was exactly what civilians in Gaza were desperate to hear. In the city of Rafah, where 1 million or more people have now fled, there were whoops and cheers and cries of delight.
We want to renew our lives once again. I want to fix my house. I want to visit my neighbors, visit my relatives. Thanks be to God.
But there were also questions and much confusion. Officials from Hamas said they'd accepted a deal that includes a limited ceasefire. But the Israelis replied that the deal was unacceptable to them. In Israel, a spokesman for the military had little to add.
We are exploring every single thing that we hear, and we're exhausting the potential about negotiations and bringing back the hostages. And that is our main mission, to bring them home as quickly as possible.
According to an Israeli official, Hamas had accepted a proposal forwarded by the Egyptians. And as for the Americans, well, they said the negotiations could go either way.
I won't be able to comment any further on this until we know where things stand. I hope you can understand that. I know everybody's curious about what's in this response, what the Israeli reaction to it is. I'm just not going to get ahead of the process. We want to get these hostages out. We want to get a ceasefire in place for 6 weeks. We want to increase humanitarian assistance. And the last thing that I want to do is say anything at this podium that's going to put that process at risk.
It's difficult to know much about the terms being negotiated, but an Israeli plan for a military operation in Rafah has already begun. Our team found thousands of residents trying to flee on horse-drawn carts and trailers and trucks.
I don't know what we'll do. We've only taken the clothes that we're wearing. We don't have a mattress, a blanket, or anything else. I can't describe my feelings now, this disruption that's been caused to our lives.
This is the only part of the Gaza Strip that hasn't been occupied by Israeli troops. And they've signaled their intent to seize it like this. Leaflets ordering the evacuation of Rafah's eastern districts were dropped from above. Residents told to travel to a coastal area called Al-Mawasi and to do so immediately.
We don't know where to go. We have nowhere to go. We can't find transport to get to Al-Mawasi. The roads are full of crowds. It will take hours to get to Al-Mawasi, Khan Yunis or any other area.
100 kilometers to the north, in the city of Tel Aviv, family and friends of Israeli hostages being held in Gaza demonstrated and remonstrated for a deal with Hamas. Israel's all-powerful war cabinet now set to discuss their adversary's latest proposal. John Sparks, Sky News in Jerusalem.
Well, we'll speak to our US correspondent Mark Stone in Washington in a moment. But first, John Sparks is live in Jerusalem for us tonight. And John, what's the latest this evening? And should there be any optimism to be gained from the fact that Israel is saying that they will send negotiators to continue talks?
Well, Gillian, I mean, it's a very good question. I think, there are things that we can be clear about this evening, and there are a whole lot of things that remain unknown or really mired in a great cloud of confusion. So let's start with the things that we can be absolutely sure about. We can be certain that an agreement between the parties to the war in Gaza has not been done. A deal has not been done at this stage. But I think we also know that this unorthodox negotiation, and a negotiation where the parties to the conflict don't sit at the same table, aren't in the same room, probably aren't in the same city either. We know this unorthodox negotiation continues apace, and I think that is obviously good news. And I think we also know that Israel's plans to launch a major military operation in the city of Rafah in southern Gaza, that continues apace. But what we don't know is what Hamas thought that they had agreed to this afternoon when they said that they had decided to accept a ceasefire. What had they decided to accept? Was it a temporary ceasefire or some other type of ceasefire? Had they agreed to an exchange of hostages? If so, well, how many? But, you know, I think a lot of people will feel encouraged tonight about the fact that Hamas seem keen to do some sort of deal. Maybe that reflects the situation in southern Gaza, the fact that they are coming under increasing pressure there. But I think a lot of people will feel encouraged in Gaza, here in Israel, and the rest of the world, that perhaps, just perhaps, some sort of ceasefire is possible.
OK, let's cross to Mark at the White House. And how have the Americans responded, particularly after the airstrikes on Rafah this evening?
No, but the optics of that moment were terrible. At the same point at which the spokesperson for President Biden was being asked in the briefing room here at the White House about this impending invasion of Rafah, he was asked, did he know that there were airstrikes ongoing at that point? He said he didn't know, and they were still of the view that an invasion of Rafah was absolutely the wrong thing to do. But as he was speaking, the Israeli Defense Forces announced in a press release precisely what we had already heard from our teams on the ground in Rafah, that indeed they were bombing Rafah, heavy bombing of the eastern part of Rafah as they continue what they say are operations to find and root out Hamas. It's been the most extraordinary day, Gillian, of hope and then hope ebbing away. At the beginning of the day, it looked pretty unlikely that any deal was close, but by lunchtime, here at the White House, there was some hope that a deal maybe was close. The announcement from Hamas in Qatar that they had agreed to a deal. Was it the deal that had been on the table at the beginning of the weekend? People did not know, but it was hopeful, certainly. And it's interesting, too, that at the point at which that deal came out, President Biden was around a dining table here at the White House with the King of Jordan. We look so often for honest brokers in this conflict to see what they're saying. If there is an honest broker, maybe it is Jordan, because that is the nation that has diplomatic ties with Israel. It's been close to Israel for many years, but it is a key Arab nation too, and it has the ear of the Arab world. And I think the statement from the Jordanian foreign minister is interesting tonight, and I'll read it to you. It's brief. It says, tremendous effort has been made to produce an exchange deal that will release hostages and realise a ceasefire. Hamas has put an offer on the table. If Netanyahu genuinely wants a deal, he will negotiate the offer in earnest. Instead, he is jeopardising the deal by bombing Rafah.
Mark and John, thank you both. John Swinney has become the new leader of the SNP after being unopposed in the leadership ballot. His appointment as Scotland's new First Minister is expected to be approved by the Scottish Parliament later this week. Our Scotland correspondent Conor Gillis reports from Glasgow.
In the centre of Scotland's biggest city, the talk is of what new looks like in the new First Minister.
Quick question, do you know who this man is?
Unfortunately, yes.
We're from the news. Do you know who this man is?
I don't think I do know who that man is.
Yeah. John Swinney? Yeah, Swinney.
What do you make of him?
I think he failed at his job as the Education First Minister.
I've got mixed reservations, yeah. I mean, I'm an SNP supporter, but I think we need a good shake-up.
A steady man, but not moving forward, I don't think.
He hopes to prove them wrong. John Swinney crowned an SNP leader, uncontested.
Now, I know there's some controversy that I'm the only candidate to stand for the leadership. Perhaps not surprisingly, I take a very different view to that. For me, the fact that I am the only candidate demonstrates that the Scottish National Party is coming back together again now.
A First Minister in waiting after his main rival, Kate Forbes, pulled out of the race.
Conor Gillis.
You mentioned Kate Forbes there. Is she the person in this government that you will lead with all of the authority and none of the responsibility?
I want to make sure that I have a strong team that is able to lead the Scottish Government. I have made it very clear that Kate will have a big role to play in that.
This may have been the coronation of John Swinney as SNP leader. He admits the party needs to get its act together. The next move is becoming Scotland's First Minister, and that's likely to happen in the coming days.
We've got to remember John Swinney has been a member of the SNP's Scottish Government for 16 of the 17 years that they have been in power. And his 1 year on the backbenches, he supported some of the most controversial and divisive bills that the SNP introduced. So to say it'll be a fresh start with John Swinney, I think is a huge exaggeration.
Thank you all very much.
Swinney hopes to reset relations as he begins to govern as a minority. He also admits his part in the polarisation of politics in the Scotland he will now lead. Conor Gillis, Sky News, Glasgow.
Despite losing hundreds of council seats and a parliamentary by-election, Rishi Sunak insisted today the outcome of the next general election is not a foregone conclusion. The Prime Minister was speaking for the first time since the outcome of last week's local elections. Here's our chief political correspondent, John Craig.
After dire election results that caused a stir among his gloomy MPs, Rishi Sunak says he's determined to show voters that he's making a difference on issues like tax cuts, welfare reform, migration and defence.
Lovely, thank you.
And after claiming the results suggest the UK's heading for a hung parliament, with Labour as the largest party, he said he's going to fight for the country and deliver on what matters to voters.
Whilst, of course, this was a disappointing weekend for us, the result of the next general election isn't a foregone conclusion, and indeed actually is closer than, or the situation is closer than many people are saying, or indeed some of the opinion polls are predicting, and that's why I'm absolutely determined to fight incredibly hard.
Labour followed its weekend election gains with a campaign video attacking the Conservatives' record in 14 years in government.
Now, as we approach what will hopefully be the final episode, let's see what will unfold next in chaos and decline.
Labour claims it's aiming for a Commons majority in the general election, not a hung parliament.
When you look at where Labour's vote was at these elections, you see that Labour is winning people back in those areas that are so important on the road to number 10. Now, there's no room for complacency for Labour, but it does indicate that people have very clearly said they've had enough of that decline and chaos under the Conservatives.
But as MPs return to Westminster, even though Tory plotters may have abandoned moves to oust him, Mr Sunak may have more to fear from attacks from his own side than from the Labour benches. But while Tory rebels have previously predicted Mr Sunak's goose is cooked, he insists there's still life in him yet. John Craig, Sky News, Westminster.
A little girl who was one of 5 people who died while trying to cross the English Channel in an overloaded migrant boat last month has been laid to rest. 7-year-old Sarah al-Hashimi was crushed to death when a second group of migrants climbed on board an already crowded boat as it was setting off from France. Our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons reports.
Sarah was a vivacious girl with a ready smile and a life spent on the move. Born in Belgium to Iraqi parents, she grew up in Sweden and died in the cold waters of France as her parents tried to get across the channel. She was on this overloaded boat, fatally crushed after a rival group of migrants hijacked it. Her father, Ahmed, is a broken man. We meet at the morgue. He's come to collect Sarah's body and says he only ever wanted to support his family.
I had no choice. I wanted to keep her safe. I wanted her to have a future, a life with dignity like other children, but I could not do it. Everything went against me.
So I ask, would he try again to get across the channel?
Of course not. I don't think about that anymore. Just the thought of that hurts me. I lost my child, my daughter, who was like a butterfly. She was like a bird. She was everything to us. The light in our home, our source of laughter, everything. I lost her, and I don't want to lose her brothers.
Sarah's body was brought to this mosque in Lille, and then the small white coffin loaded into a hearse for its final journey. At the cemetery, well-wishers and family, as Sarah was laid to rest. Cross-channel migration is complex and dangerous, and its routes spread far, and this is the terrible proof of that. Sarah was born in Belgium, grew up in Sweden, but her Iraqi parents were fearful of deportation. So they made the decision to try to get to Britain. And now their daughter lies here in a grave in northern France. Her cousins had come from their home in London. They wanted to talk to us.
She was wonderful. She was so sweet. I always called her and I always wanted to see her in real life, but I never could. They were in Finland, Sweden, Belgium, but it never happened. I really wanted to see her.
Yeah, doesn't feel like true. I thought she was sleeping. I thought she was in the hospital. I thought she had something. Not died. That really makes me angry and scared.
This was a day painted by despair. A young girl dies trying to cross the channel. And what's worse, we all know this will happen again. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Lille.
Let's take a look at some of the day's other main stories for you now. Former US President Donald Trump has been threatened with jail if he violates a gagging order again during his hush money trial. Today, he was fined $1,000 for contempt for a 10th time. The gagging order prevents Trump from commenting on the jurors, key witnesses and other people connected to the criminal trial. The French President Emmanuel Macron has welcomed China's President Xi Jinping to the Élysée Palace at the start of a two-day visit to Paris. Xi also met EU head Ursula von der Leyen and will visit Serbia and Hungary following his trip to France. Students and staff at Oxford and Cambridge universities have set up camps on campus protesting against the war in Gaza. They're calling for the universities to cut financial ties with Israel. Oxford University has responded, saying it respects students and staff members' right to freedom of expression in the form of peaceful protests, but asks those taking part to do so with respect, courtesy and empathy. There have been gun salutes in London today to mark the first anniversary of the King's coronation. There was both a 41-gun salute from Green Park and this one, a 62-gun salute at the Tower of London. The King returned to public engagements last week for the first time since it was revealed he'd been diagnosed with cancer. Rail passengers face a week of disruption as train drivers walk out again as part of their long-running dispute over pay and conditions. Members of the ASLEF union have started a 6-day overtime ban nationwide. They'll also stage 3 one-day strikes across different operators over the coming days. On Tuesday, drivers from 8 companies will walk out, including South Western Railway and Thameslink. Wednesday will see disruption across another 8 lines, including Avanti, West Coast and Great Western Railway. And on Thursday, there'll be strikes on northern trains, LNER and the Transpennine Express. Reduced services will likely continue until Saturday, when the overtime ban comes to an end. Native Americans are protesting against land they consider sacred from being turned into the largest lithium mine in the United States. The mine in Nevada will be crucial to the Biden administration's green energy plans, as our US correspondent James Matthews reports.
This is northern Nevada, in the wild and west. These are Native Americans, and this was their environmental protest. Tell me, what is this about? What's today about?
Today is the last day of the prayer horse ride across northern Nevada through our indigenous communities.
They were heading to Sentinel Mountain, which their ancestors once used as a lookout. This area, they say, witnessed indigenous massacres. One in 1865, when more than 30 tribal members were killed by US cavalry. Today, this land they call sacred is at the heart of America's electric car revolution, where construction has started on a lithium mine, so-called white gold, to make batteries for electric vehicles.
You know, we're people too.
Myron Smart says his grandmother escaped the massacre here in 1865 when she was a baby.
Industrialising this place, he says, offends her memory and reflects the story of Native Americans through time.
To me, it's a sacred ground, but to the government, it's, you know, it's just, it's just Native American, that's all it is.
The company Lithium Americas is mining the Thacker Pass site on what is public land. It highlights a community benefits agreement signed with a local tribe. It says concerns about cultural and environmental resources were thoroughly addressed in the environmental impact assessment of a government body, and that it withstood comprehensive reviews by federal, district and circuit courts. It hasn't silenced objections from opponents who maintain the key evidence lies in eyewitness testimony passed down orally through generations.
Back in our ancestors' days, they didn't write any documentations down, they didn't send letters, they didn't write in journals, so there was no way that, I guess, you know, the United States government could know our story.
What's happening here feeds into Joe Biden's energy policy. The US president wants to make this country a world leader in electric vehicles. Sourcing its own lithium is central to it. The argument here is that in pursuit of a greener future, the past is paying too high a price. James Matthews, Sky News, in Thacker Pass, Nevada.
Thousands of fans gathered in Ipswich for a bus parade and heroes welcome after their club secured a return to the Premier League for the first time in 22 years. The Blues were promoted following Saturday's 2-0 victory over Huddersfield Town. Sky's Shab Chowdhury reports from Ipswich.
After 22 years, Ipswich Town are back in the Premier League. But today is the real celebration. A hero's welcome on an open-top bus, parading the streets of Ipswich. Leading them at the forefront, the main man, club coach Kieran McKenna.
No, I think everyone deserves it. I think the whole town deserve it. The players deserve it for how they've worked this year, last year. The club deserve it, and the supporters definitely deserve it. You know, they follow the club. So many of them have followed the club loyally for so many years and been waiting for a glorious day like this.
His players still reeling from Saturday's match.
It was a very surreal moment to have the whole city, the whole town with us today, celebrate what we've come through, you know, back-to-back promotions. It's been an amazing journey.
Crowds in their thousands came out to show their support. The atmosphere electric.
This isn't just a huge moment for the club, but for the fans as well.
It's been unbelievable. Like, we wake up every day just pinching ourselves that this is actually happening.
Every conversation I ever had with my granddad was, God, we were rubbish today, weren't we? And he's missed the past 2 years of us being unbelievable, so it's quite emotional.
Also celebrating 4,000 miles away in Miami is lifelong club supporter and sponsor Ed Sheeran, who's promised the players a night out to mark their success.
Hey, don't you, mate? I'm in Miami. I've got to pay for the sponsorship somehow. I'm back on Wednesday. Do you guys want to go out?
Fun and games for now, but hard work for the next few months to keep the momentum going. For the club, in the meantime, the only way is up. Sabah Chowdhury, Sky News in Ipswich.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the broadcaster and commentator, Alex Andreou, and the former Conservative Special Advisor, Salma Shah. Amongst the stories, we'll be discussing this on the front of the Telegraph, their headline, Netanyahu rejects Hamas ceasefire. Do stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. Sky News understands China is responsible for a recent hack on the Ministry of Defence relating to current personnel and machinery. Israel have begun targeted military action in Rafah, despite Hamas accepting the terms of a ceasefire proposed by Qatar and Egypt. John Swinney, the new leader of the SNP, said his party is now back on the front foot. The Scottish Parliament will now vote to approve him as Scotland's new First Minister this week. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the broadcaster and commentator Alex Andreou and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. So let's see what's on the front of some of those newspapers for you now. Well, the headline on the Times, "No truce yet," says Israel, as according to Netanyahu, the Hamas-backed deal doesn't meet his country's demands. That's also the lead in The Guardian, as Israeli airstrikes on Rafah began just hours after Hamas accepted a ceasefire for hostages deal. The Daily Telegraph reports that Israel has criticised the deal as a ruse and has vowed to continue its invasion of Rafah. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a breakthrough in genetic research raises hopes of early treatment for Alzheimer's. That's on the front of the Eye. The Metro has the story of schoolgirl Tia Gordon, whose mother says it took 4 years and 30 medical assessments to diagnose her daughter with a brain tumour. The Financial Times hears that the growth of trade around the world is expected to double in the next year, thanks in part to lower inflation and positive developments for the US economy. The Daily Express says Britain is on the verge of a house price boom. Experts predict values could soar 20% in the next 4 years. And the Star has a history lesson. They say ginger tomcats are fierce and feisty for some reason. Yeah, we need a bit more on that story, methinks. A reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we're joined tonight by Alex Andreou and Salma Shah. Welcome to both of you. Well, it's been a really unpredictable evening, day in the Middle East. The Times, their headline, "No truce yet," says Israel. It was thought that Hamas had accepted a deal. Israel said it wasn't the deal that they'd put on the table. And tonight, there have been airstrikes on Rafah.
Yeah, and I suspect those two things are intimately connected because Israel, having begun that offensive on Rafah today, are probably playing a little bit for time so that they can achieve more of their military goals. While they're still going, deal? What deal? We don't know anything about a deal. And the question really is not the pressure that's coming from outside Israel as much as the pressure coming from inside Israel. Because I imagine the families of the hostages, knowing that there is now a possible deal on the table, they will be saying, why are you going in with the military if there's a deal available? And that might we begin to see the first cracks in that wartime cabinet? I think the next 24 hours are very critical for Netanyahu.
And Salma, we have seen demonstrations out of Israel today to that very point, and there has been that criticism continuously of Netanyahu that he's more interested in annihilating Hamas rather than returning the hostages.
Well, I think, in fact, the Times story covers this well, very succinctly on its front page, where it details the breakdown of the negotiations, the intermediaries in terms of Egypt and Qatar. But just towards the end of the piece, there is also, just to counter what you've said about the pressure coming from the families of the hostages, actually there's pressure as well from his hardline coalition partners who are asking for this. So he has some defence, I think, from his political standpoint to say that I need to go in and I need to go with this mission that I've had right from the beginning, which is to destroy Hamas. One of the things that I find odd about this is how does the IDF attempt to extract the hostages in this type of situation? And I think there will be a lot of families in Israel, hoping to see their relatives come home, who are probably going to want to understand the detail of the military operation as well.
Yes, no, very, very difficult indeed. And speaking to your point about the cabinet, the coalition, the security minister, Ben-Gvir, has threatened to break up the government coalition if it accepts the ceasefire, and he denounced the Hamas move as a ploy. So pressure from within the cabinet for Netanyahu as well.
Of course.
In terms of a ceasefire being reached, we also hear on a positive note that Israel is saying that they will actually continue negotiations. That's what we're hearing tonight, Salma.
Yes, we are hearing that. There's a new delegation that's been sent to Cairo for further talks. As I mentioned before, we've got Egypt and Qatar acting as the intermediaries. But with Rafah now under attack, it seems that being able to negotiate obviously adds a little bit more pressure, adds a little bit more focus, as if they needed any more, to those discussions. And it might be an attempt to get further concessions for the Israeli position in terms of the negotiation. But I think that there will be that cynicism that hangs around Netanyahu around the way that they've denied or declined the ceasefire, the terms of the ceasefire, and have now gone in to Rafah, where there are essentially 1 million people trapped at this point in time.
And there will be enormous confusion, I think, because people were out in the streets celebrating earlier because they thought it was a ceasefire, and Israel are dropping leaflets with a QR code on them telling people to evacuate, and people will be very confused. There will be people who think it's all over, as it were, that some negotiation, some settlement has been reached. And then suddenly the army will be there, attacking in Rafah. So I imagine the collateral damage, the civilian casualties, there is a possibility that they will be very high. And with a deal on the table, I don't know how long Netanyahu's international allies can still toe the line.
And that's the question. We heard from the White House this evening, and prior to the airstrikes on Rafah, the White House was saying that they're opposed to any ground invasion into Rafah, and they've been consistent on that for a number of weeks now, that they do not support any further incursion into Rafah. So tonight, now we've seen these airstrikes, what's likely to be the noises coming out of the White House?
The White House, Washington's been quite interesting about this, because when we've talked about this, as this conflict's progressed, the White House has gone from being shoulder to shoulder with Israel to actually really chastising Netanyahu, certainly on on aid and the access to aid. We have the Telegraph as well that's coming, but the Telegraph has quotes from the White House spokesperson, John Kirby, who's basically still keeping his powder dry at this point and saying that they want to examine Hamas's ceasefire proposal and will communicate its views to Qatar and Egypt. So they are very much going to be aligned into this process. They want to understand how this is going to play. As Alex said, this is a very delicate time. They do have a delegation from Israel going into Cairo, so the White House wants to be able to, and I would expect this from any government, they want to be able to go through the process and not say anything outside of that might tip the balance or change the way that those discussions
They pretty much said that explicitly in the White House briefing today. They were like, don't ask us for detail, because basically it might destabilize a situation that's going in a positive direction, so we're not going to say anything. But a very significant thing happened a couple of days ago that's gone a little bit under the radar. The US stopped the first shipment of ammunition to Israel 2 days ago. They haven't given exactly the reasons why, but it is the first time a shipment has been stopped by the White House from going to Israel since October the 7th. And a lot of people are saying this is very significant in foreign policy circles.
And Salma, in terms of the response from Hamas? Because the briefing that we had from the White House happened before the airstrikes on Rafah. What then do you think is their next move? Are they likely to say, well, we're not going to go any further with discussions on a ceasefire now that this strike has happened?
I think it's very difficult for them not to do that, especially when you have, lots of Middle Eastern countries mediating, essentially, because they want to see an end to this. I think Hamas's position is, of course, strengthened by the fact that they still have hostages that the Israelis are trying to get out. Even in this particular deal, they agreed to release elderly, women, young people, the sick, and over a period of 6 weeks. So what Israel might be asking for, it goes beyond that. As soon as they lose those hostages, they lose, I mean, I hate speaking these terms, but they lose all their leverage. So for Hamas, this is very difficult because they have this one card to play. They clearly don't care about the devastation that's been inflicted in Palestine at this point. So if they are going to protect themselves with very few other places to go, certainly they can try and get through some of the borders that they're on, particularly with Egypt. But they are in a very tricky position, and I think that what we can't see is for those hostages to come to any harm by the hands of Hamas, or for them to restrict the release, certainly, of sick and elderly people as well. So I think that if they do try and counter, I wonder if Hamas is going to try and be even more difficult than they have been in the negotiations thus far.
Alex, just quickly want to talk about the student protests that we've seen in the United States spreading to Oxbridge now, we read in the Telegraph.
And again, this is an international story that's now having an impact on domestic news. I mean, those protests are becoming very much an election issue for Biden. And we're 6 months out from the presidential election. So that is also a factor, right? Because it is putting him in a very difficult position. And I suspect we will see a similar thing here where primarily Labour is put under pressure to, go slightly further one way or slightly further the other way. Because again, in the local elections, which I know we'll come to, we saw a movement away from Labour of people who were annoyed by its position on this. I
think what's interesting about this is that, obviously, Western campuses do have a great history of student protest. Whether you agree with them or not, there is, that history there. There are some difficult aspects to this. One is what's happening to Jewish students on campuses and the way that they are sort of harassed or harangued for their identity or their views, which I think is concerning and requires some delicate handling. The other is the right of people to be able to protest. I think some of the mechanisms used, creating encampments on lawns and perhaps disrupting other people's education, I think that is going to be a difficult thing to be able to balance for university leaders, but also how governments are getting involved in universities. So the Telegraph is reporting on the fact that the Prime Minister is actually asking for university leaders to come in and ask how they're going to handle this. And I think it's very, very tricky when governments get involved in what should be a free-thinking environment. Because that's the big, big difference, right? Before, when there were mass university protests, it was, generally speaking, the students as a whole against the state as a whole. Now, the clash is actually between different groups of students who are feeling their rights are being impinged upon, and government is trying to act as a sort of mediator with an agenda.
Alex and Salma, thank you very much for the moment. We shall see how those protests develop. We shall be following that keenly. In the meantime, coming up, Rishi Sunak insists a Conservative loss at the general election isn't a foregone conclusion. We'll discuss that next. Do stay with us.
Gold medalists and world champions, Team England.
Well, they took the gold medal in the Special Abilities Unified POM category, an experience of a lifetime for these athletes.
It feels absolutely amazing, and I just felt like I was in a dream through the whole experience, and I didn't want to wake up from it.
Oh, we can see the trophy next to you. Can you lift it up? How heavy is it, Jasmine?
It's very, very heavy.
So the girls have all made history. This is the first time we've ever had representation from England in a special abilities category. So the girls were the first to do it from England, joined by their unified partners who are non-disabled athletes, and then to take home the gold in their first ever year. It's just incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
It was the best thing we could ever hope for, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Jasmine, that smile is literally beaming out of the television. I can't help but smile back to you. You know, we're so happy for you following your story. What was special, do you think, about your winning routine, Jasmine? What was the bit you think that won it for you?
I can't even explain it. I feel like it was just everything, but if it was from my part in the routine, it was probably mostly my lift, where I got lifted up in the air by my teammates. I was a bit worried because I felt like I was going to go forward, but then I ended up actually getting dead high with it.
And Jasmine, what kind of message does this send to other teams about having a special abilities team? Because, you know, your team stands out on your own pretty much in the UK. This sends a strong message, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I think that it would be don't be scared to try new things, and if there's for example, people with disabilities or no abilities, they still can do anything that they want to.
In this instance, what I wanted to achieve throughout the whole process is that our disabled athletes would get the same age-appropriate experiences as non-disabled athletes. And so to be able to experience this journey with unified partners and have appropriate social interactions, you were able to have a laugh before you went on.
Yeah.
Heard Jasmine giggling quite a lot. And just to have those really nice social times that maybe you wouldn't get if you were in a typical non-disabled team. We're very inclusive, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview, still with me, Alex Andreu and Salma Shah. Let's take a look at the Metro, page 2 of the Metro. And this, I believe, is the first time that Rishi Sunak has admitted that his party is likely to lose the general election. Salma, is it?
I think it is, but I don't think anybody else was surprised by it. And I say that, as a Conservative, Conservative voter and everything else that comes with it. So Rishi Sunak, to a little derision, has said that we are headed for a hung parliament. And obviously people are a little bit sceptical about this, given the swing away from the Conservatives to Labour that was seen in the local elections. I think it's interesting because we are talking about him trying to keep people together and motivated for the foreseeable until the election. And here's the interesting thing about a story like this. If you're a political campaigner or a strategist, you can go one of two ways. You can say it's really close, so it's worth fighting for, which is what he's sort of doing here. Or you can say, you know what, it's a foregone conclusion, so it doesn't matter if you give us your vote anyway. And it's kind of like, which way do you go? And at the moment, it seems like both messages are being deployed in different places. And just the same as, just for fairness sake, just the same as Pat McFadden, the Labour Party's national campaign chief, is saying, there's no plans for us to have any kind of pact with any of the other smaller parties, because it has to be said that it hasn't gone unnoticed that actually, you know, the Greens did incredibly well. The Lib Dems, maybe not to the same extent, but the Greens did do incredibly well in some of the council seats. So is there potentially sort of a progressive split that's happening on the Labour side as well? Some people are critical of that too. But yes, I think that a little bit of scepticism about that comment on the hung parliament.
It is a change of tone, though, because in the papers last night, the Prime Minister was saying if we could pull together, we could still do this.
Which just seemed really odd to me. I mean, it was sort of reaching levels of pathological denial to say, oh, we're just going to stick with the plan. And
isn't that all politics?
People love us, really.
Levels of pathological delusion.
There has to be some sort of grounding to reality. My very favourite comment from the election coverage was Andrew Mitchell to your colleague Beth Rigby, who said about the Midlands, the West Midlands mayoral election, that there's a recount, so we know that Andy Street has either won or nearly won. Either result is terrific for the Conservative Party. It's like, there's no nearly won in politics. He's either won or he's lost.
That's what you call complete optimism.
Spin.
Just want to move over to some American politics. Just got time for this story in the Telegraph, and this is regarding Donald Trump, threatened with jail over contempt, and this is him being fined latterly $1,000 for contempt for the 10th time. He will not obey the gagging orders from the judges.
No, we were having a little debate, weren't we, as to whether he is actively pursuing a course of action that will see him put in jail and make him a martyr, because that might sort of galvanise his base, or whether he genuinely thinks he's so untouchable that it will never happen and would completely hate it, being put in a cell and unable to be in control of everything that happens. And I don't know which it is. It might be both.
There is some element of theatre to this, undoubtedly. But what I really love about this story more than anything is that he's obviously been fined for $1,000 to do this, but it must be changed to him because he obviously doesn't matter, and that's why he's being threatened with the sanction of being thrown into a cell, because, you know, misbehaving and paying it off in the court doesn't seem to be enough of a deterrent, which is also quite bougie behaviour.
Yeah, and it's the 10th time, so he's clearly not getting
he will either win or nearly win.
You're quite right, Alex. Well spotted. Thank you both for the moment. Let's take a look at the weather for you now. Well, after a fairly wet day today, it'll be much drier for the rest of the week. Northern and central Britain will have a rather cloudy start tomorrow, but expect sunny spells elsewhere. It'll be quite mild under the cloud, chilly where skies were clear overnight with some fog in the south. Southern Britain will be quite sunny through the morning after early fog lifts, but a few relatively light showers will bubble up. The north, meanwhile, looks mainly dry but rather grey, although the far north can expect sunshine. Ireland and Northern Ireland look dry too and quite cloudy after a sunny start in the north and east. It'll be warm in the south, quite chilly in the northeast. Northern Britain, Ireland and Northern Ireland will see bright or sunny spells developing later. Norfolk will cloud over. Coming up next on Sky News at 11. Sky News understands the MOD has been targeted by China in a massive data hack. This is Sky News at 11 o'clock. The headlines this evening. The Ministry of Defence hacked by China in a massive data breach targeting service personnel. Also ahead, renewed tension in Gaza as Israel approves military action in Rafah, despite Hamas accepting a ceasefire proposal. John Swinney becomes leader of the SNP unopposed and is expected to be sworn in as Scotland's First Minister later this week. A little girl crushed to death on a migrant boat last month is laid to rest in France. Gun salutes mark 1 year since the coronation of King Charles. Plus, celebrations in Suffolk, Ipswich Town party after securing their place in top-flight football. And we'll have a full look at the front pages in our press preview at 11:30. Good evening. Our top story this hour, Sky News understands that the Chinese state has hacked the Ministry of Defence. MPs are going to be told tomorrow of a massive data breach involving the MOD targeting service personnel. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, has the latest from the Ministry of Defence.
Sky News has revealed that the Ministry of Defence has been the target of a massive data breach by the Chinese state. We understand that officials in the MOD building behind me have been scrambling all weekend after discovering just a few days ago that the payroll systems for existing service personnel, armed forces personnel, and some veterans was hacked. Hacked, we understand, by the Chinese state, although tomorrow, when Grant Shapps stands up and tells MPs details of what went on, he will not name China, but we understand that China is the identity of who they think is behind it. Now, that payroll system was operated by a contractor. I understand that preliminary investigations suggest that no actual data has been taken, but we'll have to wait and see. I also understand that that payroll system wasn't actually part of the MOD's main computer system, but nevertheless, I think there's an understanding in the building behind me that the idea that the Chinese were infiltrating, trying to infiltrate that system that has the identities and the bank account details of some of our most cherished personnel, some of the most cherished public officials that there are, will cause controversy and will up pressure on Number 10 to look again at the relationship between the UK and China. It was just a couple of months ago that the Deputy Prime Minister was revealing that China had been behind a breach of the Electoral Commission's data. That's the watchdog that looks after all of our voting data, and that China had been targeting specific MPs, China skeptic MPs, if you will, for more information. Now the news that armed services personnel have been targeted by the Chinese, I think, will be a cause of great concern. Tomorrow, Grant Shapps will lay out more details. Also tomorrow, I think there'll be an enormous effort underway to reassure service personnel. They'll be told that even though the system's been shut down, they'll still be paid this month and that they've got the situation under control. But my goodness, I think tonight, a big problem, big further problem, a big further boulder in Britain's relationship with China. Pressure is building to work out not only what went wrong, whether